Do you know how you can tell that the elves are really cool? They have a magic broom that's brooming the road, I guess? I mean, that's pretty cool. And this guy's pretty cool. Although those shoulder pads look kind of weird. I mean, actually, would those work as good armor? I almost feel like if there was like something a little bit bigger to like, so like, because like my pauldrons, for instance, like if you hit like this part of the shoulder and then try to push forward, it would block it. Like that's the point. But anyway, it doesn't matter. They're allowed to be elves. Elves love being spiky, whether they're good elves or scary elves. They love being spiky, and that's fine. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the population of the Empire, and I thought that that was going to be a bit of fun. Also, this is a very pretty fountain, isn't it? Said the lion. But something that's very interesting to me about the population of the Empire. So there is so much information about the Empire and about like the people living in the Empire and things like that. And I personally find all this very, very cool. I mean, like there's actually enough information. Ooh, are you getting your feet wet? Just take a little dip of your toes. You can almost get like enough information for it to be like an actual historical nation, and I find that really neat. For instance, I have multiple books on the Empire, but I also have a book coming in the mail now. It's called Blood on the Reich, and it has all kinds of like artwork of people within the Empire talking about the lives in the Empire and stuff like that. That's neat. But the Empire is interesting to me partially because of how cosmopolitan it is. It's not just made up of humans, but it's also made of dwarves and elves and halflings, and so there's a few other things in there too that you might not normally think about. So it's pretty interesting. So I was just going to talk a little bit about the people who make up the empire, the different populations, the different species, as well as the different kinds of people in terms of like humans and stuff like that. And we're going to start with humans. Humans, like beautiful Yamina here. Look at how cool she is. Make up the vast majority of the people in the empire. The vast majority of folks in the empire, like roughly 90%, probably 91%, somewhere in there, are imperial. Imperial humans. They are pretty much everywhere. And, that's to be expected. It's the Empire of Man. It was founded by a big cool guy named Sigmar. And he was a human before he became divine. So, and it's a place where humans are, like one of the largest nations of power in the old world, or pretty much the largest, most powerful nation in the old world. You could argue about whether or not the most powerful human nation, because there's also Cathay, and those kind of, like, there's kind of some question about which one is actually more powerful in that sense. But yeah, so humans make up the vast majority, but normally we normally just think of people who are, like commoners or like, European type folks, but what we tend to forget is that there's actually a good deal of diversity in some parts of the empire. For instance, there are like Arabian quarters where you have lots of people from, okay, you have floating boxes, but you have lots of people from around uh, Araby. They come in, and some of them are traders, some of them are merchants, some of them are immigrants, some of them are people who come to actually live in the empire and do their own thing, and they like create their own businesses, they trade, maybe they bring goods in from Arabia. That's pretty neat. You have people like that, but you also have Tillians, and Tillians are basically fantasy Italians, and they have come in. Sometimes they're mercenaries, sometimes they're artisans. Like the Hellblaster volley gun is actually originally a Tillian design. I'm pretty sure. I'm trying to remember what the guy's name was. I can't remember his name right off the top of my head, but it was originally a Tillian design from a Tillian inventor based on Da Vinci and all this other stuff. And we also have people from Estalia who are basically Spanish. We have some people who are from Nippon and Cathay. We have people from all over, humans from all over. So, we do tend to. I'm sorry, I have to reach back with my tail and scratch my dog because she's looking at me funny. So, we do tend to kind of think of people as, these very pale, honky types all over the place. A lot of whiteys, but there's not all just whiteys. You know, like Yamina here, she's half Arabian, half Tilean. So, you know, there's a bit more diversity than some people let on in that category. Are the vast majority of these people, you know, from like kind of the Reichland, you know, or Everland or something like that? Yeah, but you do have people who are from all over the place. Um, and you know, and their personalities can vary very widely depending on where you are. For instance, a lot of people call people from like Reichland very like snobby and arrogant. People from Ostland are kind of hardy, and you know, people from Nordland are kind of a little bit got a little bit of that Viking in them. But you know, and I did find this quote about Averlanders, which I thought was pretty nice. Avalanders are not bad for manlings. They're solid in character, stick to their words, and don't put on airs like those nose in the air Reichlanders. And they make the best manling beer in the South. Well, that's not saying much, but you won't choke on it. And that was from a dwarf merchant in a book, and I just thought that was kind of funny. You know, Everland is also my favorite province. I'm just gonna throw that out there. I've always really liked the yellow and black clothing of the Everlanders, and I've always liked their cattle and their like they make the wine and all this other stuff. Like there's the whole thing where they make like the cheapest wine in like all the Empire, where you can find all the winos drinking it, but they also make the best wine in all the Empire. It's really neat. And you have lands that are vastly different, so you get vastly different kinds of people. So, you know, there's a surprising amount of diversity just there. But then, you know, we also have, since we mentioned dwarf merchants, dwarves. You know, dwarves are the second people of the empire by some estimates. Well, I mean, they are the second people of the empire. A lot of stuff in the empire is built by dwarvish hands. A lot of the materials are made by dwarves. There are dwarves who migrated there to the empire. Some of them just migrated, you know, for new opportunity and stuff like that. Some dwarves migrated because they think that the Under Empire, the way things are going now, it's basically on the decline, and they're better off going and helping out the Manlings. The Manlings is like a dwarf term for um, humans. They call them Manlings. They also sometimes call them Umgi, which is kind of funny because that's based at least partially on the word for like shoddy, which I think is kind of funny. Dwarves are also like, you know, kind of specially bonded to the Empire because of the life of Sigmar, where, you know, their ancestors, the dwarf ancestors and the human ancestors fought together. Um, you know, Sigmar saved a high king in the past, and you know, there's a very strong bond there. And it's also very interesting because I was reading about it, and apparently some cities, it didn't specify which ones, but some cities actually have as much as 10% dwarf population. So that's a pretty high amount of your population being non-human. It's interesting too because in one of the Felix, in one of the Gotrek and Felix books, there's actually a part where a bunch of dwarfs kind of go up to Felix and uh Gotrek, mostly to Felix because Felix is much more of a talkative type guy. That's very pretty water, but he's much more of a talkative type guy. And they went up to him and they asked him, "Well, do people treat dwarves well in the Empire, or are they terrible to him?" And this was like a very well-known kind of artisan from one of their dwarvish clans. He says, "Oh, they treat them very well. People really like dwarven work and stuff like that." And you know, so people do pay higher for dwarven work, and you know they work sometimes in the Imperial Army, and they also help defend cities. They also tend to build like they're like some of the most respected craftsmen in all the world. So, you know, the dwarven craft is actually very well respected, and you know, like a lot of dwarven steel and dwarven metalwork is highly sought after, and dwarven engineers teach at the schools of engineering and things like that. Something that is also kind of interesting I discovered was that apparently dwarves like to kind of form into their own little communities within like the greater imperial stuff. So like they might go out and they might socialize with the other they might go socialize with humans, but they also sometimes live in their own little communities within the cities, which is kind of interesting. People also do have a variety of attitudes towards dwarves. Some people don't like the dwarves because they're very successful and they tend to be very well off, or they tend to be pretty well off for being like foreigners and migrants into the cities and things like that. So some people are a little bit annoyed by how decent or how good the dwarves have it, really. But uh, oh, my witching skill's only at 60. I thought I had leveled up more. But anyway, people do have a variety of attitudes. Some people are basically like dwarf worshippers, where they think that dwarves are basically like a chosen special race because of their close relationship with Sigmar and the relationship of people are the High King and all that in the past with Sigmar. But yeah, so they have this. They have the very important part. They're a very important part of the Empire, and I think that's part of what's cool about them. And we also have elves, and elves are kind of interesting in this case because elves don't really tend to see themselves as part of the empire. Even the elves who live directly in the imperial cities and stuff like that, they don't tend to think of themselves as part of the empire. The thing that's interesting about the elves as well is that they were actually originally back in the olden times, elves had colonies all over the old world, including in Telia, Estalia, all over the coast, around Breton, where's Bretonia now, and the Empire. And they had colonies all over the place, and they had built up a lot of their like little cities inside of the forests and stuff like that, and they came like really close to nature and things like that. During the War of the Beard, and that was the war of the dwarves versus the elves. Most of the elves got pushed out and got pushed back to Ulthuan, or at least out of the old world. Though some did end up sticking around, and there were a lot of people who ended up becoming holdouts who hold out in like within the forests and things like that. There's a few that also hang out like in the ports of Araby and Estalia, but for the Empire purposes, we're mostly talking about what common people in the Empire would call wood elves. Something that's also interesting to note about wood elves is that wood elves and high elves are called different things, and like there's all kinds of different distinctions between elves. They're not actually physically different. They're basically exactly the same in terms of physicality. They're all still the same species. They just fight for different groups and things like that. Um, it's kind of interesting to see too that in what is this? Oh, it's Big Kitty. Hi, Kitty. But, some people do see elves as being quite different, but there's a lot of people who are kind of mystified by elves, and they've never like elves are much rarer in the Empire than dwarves are. Dwarves are fairly common in the sense, and especially in some cities, it's basically just like you basically just see dwarves and you see that they're just like a different kind of people. But elves have an almost like mystical type quality about them to a lot of people. It's kind of interesting though because there are elven adventurers, people who would strike out from the woods or from Ulthuan or wherever, and they wander on the Empire. Sometimes this is because like maybe they just don't fit. Maybe you're a high elf and maybe you've lived among these folks all your life, but really and truly you just don't feel like you fit in. You feel like maybe they're a little too conservative, or maybe they're just a little bit too much of Debbie Downers because it's always about like, oh man, we're like falling and stuff. Maybe you see this lady and you go, oh man, I'll never compare to her in being in the prettiest armor. So then you go to the Empire and you get to be prettier than everyone and you're like, wow, that's easy. Of course. But some people really do, some elves really do not feel at home among other elves, so they end up wandering around, and some elves are simply looking for something different. Sometimes you also get characters like Corellian from Vermintide, who is on this very specific mission. Sometimes you get people who just wanted to find something different and kind of wanted to just be, by themselves, or maybe they just thought it would be fun to live amongst humans for a little while. And you get they should be play like if you're doing like a Warhammer roleplay type thing, they're probably pretty rare, but there are a couple of small groups of elves among the Empire, and there's also some that like kind of have relationships within the Empire. There's also something that's kind of interesting, although a lot of elves are of course kind of arrogant, and some elves are very arrogant, but they're arrogant about like they were here first. They were here well before humans were. They were when humans were still pounding rocks together. I was being trained to conquer galaxies or shoot a bow. One of the two. Same thing, really. But they they do kind of have that flippant attitude towards the Empire, but a lot of them have kind of come to recognize that they have to deal with the Empire, similar to how like the ones near Bretonnian realize they kind of have to deal with Bretonnians. You gotta deal with the people around you, and a lot of elves are basically like at the Lauren. Yeah, you're probably just not gonna just wander in there. I think Athel Lauren is the name of the wood elf thing. I'd have to double check. But you're not going to wander into a lot of wood elf parts. However, some elves are more friendly than others. Some elves are a little bit more willing to communicate than others. And some elves are just more like, hey, I would prefer it if you die. But, there aren't like enough elves to make like their own townships like dwarves do sometimes. Uh, but they're kind of wandering around. And something that's kind of interesting I found was that here from one of my role playing books, they're described as they tend to be more often encountered as wandering entertainers, travelers out seeing the empire and seeing the sights. Elf experts are welcome in houses of nobles, where they serve as tutors, swordmasters, archery instructors, huntsmen, and trophy courtiers. So basically, some people are like, "Hey, I want to have sex with the elf because it makes me feel special." But I did find that kind of funny. But it is interesting because that does mean that some just like kind of wander around the empire as entertainers and guards and trainers and doing all kinds of other things. I mean, I did kind of have it at one point believing that Yamina and Gracia, and Khadija and all of them probably had an elven tutor for their swordsmanship and things like that, just because I thought that was an interesting idea. It's very interesting to think about, like how elves do form a part of the empire, but we don't think about them as much as dwarves. Dwarves are just an obvious everyday part of the empire in a lot of ways. They're very much a part of it, but we don't necessarily think about the elves. But elves are important to the empire. Elves helped set up the College of Magic. Teclis helped set up the colleges of magic under Magnus the Pious and all this other stuff. And you know, there's certainly a lot of intercommunication between humans and elves. And elves, they're not quite as bad as Eldar in the sense that they're not always walking around going, "We are saving you and you can't understand it, human." A lot of times the elves will at least attempt to like speak to like the humans and try to explain to them why they're doing what they're doing. At least the high elves and wood elves. Dark elves, obviously, then they don't care. But, it's very interesting to kind of like see like how different these various different people are. Don't disable me. How dare you disable me? I'll have you know I have a sword. Thank you. What you got? Ooh, cat claw. But yeah, so that's very interesting, and they have all kinds of different roles that they perform within the Empire. Obviously, much rarer than dwarves, but still very important. Now we have halflings. One of the things I found interesting was one of the first lines in my book is, "Without humans, the halflings would not have survived in this world." And you know, it's kind of interesting because halflings are sometimes used for like comedic reasons, and a lot of humans don't take them very seriously. But halflings do actually help the Imperial Army, for instance. Like sometimes they are in like they have bows or they have slingers, and they are known to be very deadly with the bow or sling. They're also known to be very wonderful cooks and things like that. Um, they're also one of the things that's kind of interesting is the only elector count who is not a human is from the Moot. The Moot is where all the halflings, or most of the halflings in the Empire, live. Obviously, halflings will wander around to different places, but yeah, so they actually have their own elector count. Um, there's also quite a few gangs in the Empire that have their own halflings, so they're not all like innocent and stuff like that. A lot of people tend to view halflings in the Empire as like these perfectly innocent little guys not doing anything wrong, but you know, sometimes they're criminals and all kinds of things. It's actually funny. Sometimes apparently they'll use the fact that so many humans just think they're like purely little innocent buggers, and they'll use that as an example or like to their advantage to like pickpocket people and things like that. And I thought that was kind of funny. Um, they also apparently make great scouts over like wooded terrain and things like that, or wild terrain. They're surprisingly hardy, and one of the things that's interesting is that some halflings will work for noble houses, and halflings are famous for being really good cooks. So I was just imagining it could be kind of interesting to have like a dwarf smith, an elven tutor, and a halfling cook all in the same house, all kind of doing, you know, the same kind of thing. And like, oh, is that a, I guess that's the actual encampment, I assume. Yeah, there's champions over there. Let's not go that way. It's kind of interesting that they're sitting right next to each other, just staring at each other. But you know, so they're all kinds of um halflings all across the empire doing all kinds of different things, from being cooks to being in gangs to um oh, that unicorn looks like it's being mean, so I'm going to assassinate it. Oh, never mind. I thought I could save the other horse. It did not save in time. But it is very interesting to see that. And you know, there's also a comment in the book about how, you know, in times of crisis, everybody remembers the halflings because they always manage to pull their weight and come forward in unexpected ways. So that's really cool. Now, the last group I'm going to mention that is part of the Empire that we don't necessarily think of as part of the Empire is ogres. So ogres, specifically ogre man-eaters, and sometimes even small tribes of ogres, are employed in the Empire as mercenaries, as you know, like porters, as a few other things. Ogres are fairly rare within the Empire. However, they are people recognize ogres, like ogre man-eaters, are very specifically like mercenaries who travel the world doing mercenary things. And the thing that's interesting about ogres, though, is that the more time they spend in a place among certain people, the more they'll like adopt the culture and the different mannerisms and the clothing and stuff like that of the people around them. So if they spend a lot of time in the empire, something that's kind of an interesting thought is that they'll start to act more and more like uh more and more like Imperials. Like they'll start to wear like the big wide hats and like the slashed armbands and stuff like that. And people do like having ogres around just because they can be very good muscle, and they can also, you know, protect a lord if you pay them well. They have their uses. Obviously, there's also problems with having ogres around, because then if an ogre gets into a gang, well, that gang just becomes a lot more deadly. Now, of course, a lone ogre is very fearsome against like a lone human, but like against a whole bunch of humans who are trained, you can still kill an ogre, but an ogre is very fearsome and they're very strong. But they are part of the empire in an interesting way that they are employed, and they're travelers, and you might actually encounter some ogres who are a little bit more better educated, just because they've been traveling so much to get to the empire from the mountains of Morn and things like that. So they might be a little bit better educated. I mean, ogres are still by and large not typically very smart, but some ogres are decently intelligent. Um, So I find that all very interesting. But yeah, you have all of these different groups coming together within the empire to form something that is a greater whole. It's greater. The empire is greater than the sum of its parts, and I find that very fascinating. And part of what I love about the empire is how cosmopolitan they are. Anyway, I just thought that that would be an interesting video to talk about, like some of the different kinds of people in the empire and how they all kind of merge and work together, and like how different people view different things in the empire. And there are certainly a lot of unorthodox folks in the Empire. Some dwarves just come to the Empire because they're unorthodox. Some elves come to the Empire because they're unorthodox. Some halflings just want to cook a carrot. Or some potatoes. Potatoes. Boil them, mash them, stick them in a stew. All that good stuff. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you all have a wonderful day. And, praise Sigmar, praise Meridia, praise Jesus, praise Kali, praise all of them, and you have a wonderful day. God bless. Bye bye.